Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine it, middle of the day, a seemingly normal Monday, and suddenly a huge part of Europe, a whole peninsula, just plunges into darkness.
Yeah, quite something.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into that massive power outage that hit Spain and Portugal recently. We've looked at, well, a whole range of reports, expert takes, safety guidelines, you name it, to try and get a clear picture.
And it really paints a picture of immediate and widespread crisis. Millions of people affected instantly.
Exactly. So our mission here is to understand, what actually happened. What was the immediate fallout? And maybe what are the bigger lessons we can learn from something this significant?
Well, the first thing that jumps out is just how sudden it was and the scale. Reports say it kicked off around 12:30 p.m. local time in Spain.
Right, so 11:30 a.m. in Portugal, Monday, April 28th.
Exactly. And it wasn't like the lights flickered. It was just
Yeah.
boom, power gone across a massive area very, very quickly.
And the immediate effects sound, frankly, terrifying. Traffic lights dead, metros just stopping dead in tunnels, trains stranded out on the lines. I mean, it must have been incredibly disorienting for people caught in the middle of it.
Absolutely. And that initial period, there was a lot of confusion, no immediate word from officials about what was going on.
That vacuum of information must have been tough, that jump from normal life to sudden disruption.
Yeah, that's often where the anxiety really spikes, isn't it, when you just don't know what's happening?
So let's try and piece together the cause. Because there were a few different ideas floating around initially, weren't there?
There were, yeah. One of the first theories, and it seemed plausible, was maybe a failure in that big electricity interconnector between France and Spain.
Okay.
The idea was that failure caused Spain's grid to kind of automatically disconnect itself from the main European network to protect itself, maybe?
Right, a sort of self-preservation thing for the grid.
Kind of. But then the Portuguese grid operator, they suggested something else. Something about a rare atmospheric phenomenon.
A what now? Atmospheric phenomena.
Yeah, it sounds.
Unusual.
It does, yeah. They thought it might have caused weird oscillations on the high-voltage lines over in Spain.
Huh. Okay, what did the Spanish authorities say?
Well, they also detected something. They called it a very strong oscillation in their own network. And whatever it was, it caused this massive, incredibly fast drop in power generation.
How massive are we talking?
Get this, 15 gigawatts of power generation lost, vanished, in about 5 seconds.
5 seconds. Wow, how much is that in context?
That was something like 60%, 60% of Spain's entire electricity demand at that moment is gone.
That is almost unbelievable, losing that much power that quickly. Did that immediately raise flags about, sabotage or cyberattack?
Oh, absolutely. That's where minds go these days, isn't it? But
Yeah.
European and national cybersecurity teams jumped on it really fast. They found nothing, no evidence at all pointing to cyber attacks or any kind of deliberate sabotage. It really seemed to be a technical issue, something physical within the grid itself.
Okay, well, that's somewhat reassuring, I suppose. So it points towards the complexity of the grid itself, how interconnected everything is.
Exactly. You've got generation, you've got demand, you've got solar power coming online, imports, exports. It's this incredibly complex balancing act.
Right.
And when you get a major shock like that oscillation, the way everything is connected can mean the problem just cascades outwards really, really quickly, like dominoes falling.
Okay, so the lights go out.
Mhm.
What did that actually look like on the ground for the people affected? How many people are we talking about?
The numbers are huge. Estimates are around 60 million people directly impacted across Spain and Portugal.
60 million.
Yeah. And there were ripple effects, too. Some minor power issues reported down in southern France, and even brief internet problems possibly reaching into Morocco, probably because some key network cables run through Spain.
And transport just
Yeah.
seized up, didn't it? That seems to be a major theme.
Oh, completely paralyzed. That was one of the defining images. Metro systems in Madrid, Barcelona, Lisbon, Porto just stopped.
Right. I read stories about passengers trapped on dark trains underground.
Yeah, exactly. People stuck between stations, having to potentially walk through tunnels or climb lots of stairs in the dark at the stations. Not ideal.
Not ideal is putting it mildly. And it wasn't just the metros, was it?
No, mainline trains too. Lots of them stranded, some apparently in quite remote spots. Imagine being stuck on a train in the middle of nowhere with no power.
Yeah, the logistics of sorting that out must have been a nightmare.
Definitely. And even the big high-speed line, Madrid to Barcelona, that ground to a halt as well.
Wow. What about air travel? Airports must have been chaotic.
Hugely disrupted. Hundreds of flights canceled initially. Lisbon seemed particularly hard hit at first. Reports mention maybe 200 flights in or out affected.
Okay.
Later figures seemed a bit lower, maybe 96 departures from Lisbon, 45 from Spain overall, but still significant. Major airports, Lisbon, Madrid, Barcelona, Porto, Faro, Palma, all facing big delays.
Interesting that some holiday spots seemed less impacted, like Alicante or Malaga.
Yeah, that was noted. Maybe differences in grid connections or demand patterns. The Balearic and Canary Islands also seemed okay for international flights, apparently. It suggests the core issue was really focused on the Iberian Peninsula's mainland grid.
It's like the blackout had its own specific geography.
It seems that way, and back on the ground, for anyone trying to drive, well, with traffic lights out everywhere.
Instant gridlock, I imagine. Chaos at intersections.
Pretty much, yeah. Especially in the big cities.
And beyond just moving around, what about essential services? Hospitals.
Hospitals had to switch to backup generators immediately. They kept critical care going, thankfully, but all non-emergency stuff, routine procedures, had to be suspended.
Makes sense.
Huh?
What about other critical infrastructure?
Well, nuclear power plants have automatic safety shutdowns, so they went offline as planned. Oil refineries also halted operations.
And for ordinary people just trying to get supplies. Shops.
Many shops and supermarkets either had to close because their systems were down, or they faced huge lines as people rushed for essentials, especially things like water and batteries. They could even take payment.
Ah, right. Payment systems.
Exactly. Card machines down. Suddenly, cash was king. If you didn't have cash on you.
We were kind of stuck.
Oh.
And emergency services.
They were absolutely inundated. Hundreds and hundreds of calls. Lots of people trapped in elevators. Firefighters in Madrid alone dealt with, I think the number was 174 elevator rescues.
Just in Madrid.
Yeah. Plus medical emergencies,
Yeah.
people with respiratory issues needing power for equipment, anxiety attacks triggered by the whole situation. It was intense.
It really paints a picture of how vulnerable our modern setup is. Even something like a tennis tournament got hit.
Yeah, the Madrid Open, they had to cancel play for the whole day. Just shows how far-reaching the effects were.
So we've talked about the big picture impacts. What about the individual experiences? Do we have a sense of what it felt like for people caught up in it?
Yeah, you get these glimpses from reports. Passengers on those dark metro trains just sitting there, uncertain. People having to climb flight after flight of stairs in pitch black stations.
Using phone flashlights to see, I suppose?
Exactly, navigating those chaotic, gridlocked streets. But you also hear about the other side.
Like what?
Like communities helping out, people near stranded trains offering water or food to passengers, little acts of support popping up.
That's good to hear.
There was even one specific story about a classical violinist in Madrid. Her symphony rehearsal got canceled because nobody could get there. Just one small example of how everything interconnects.
It really drives home how much we rely on these systems working seamlessly. But in those first hours, that uncertainty, the lack of information, I imagine there was some real panic.
Oh, for sure. When something this fundamental fails and you don't know why or for how long, it's natural to feel uneasy, even scared. That initial lack of clear communication would have definitely fueled anxiety for a lot of people.
So how did the governments in Spain and Portugal react as the scale became clear?
They acted pretty quickly. Both governments declared states of emergency. Emergency cabinet meetings were called to get a handle on the situation and coordinate the response.
Were there calls for more drastic measures?
In Spain, yeah, there were some calls to bring in the military to help, and even talk of declaring a full national emergency status to free up resources.
And the key players in getting the power back on the grid operators.
Right. Red Eléctrica Española in Spain and AREN in Portugal, they were immediately working flat out. Two huge jobs: restore the power safely and figure out exactly what went wrong.
And the restoration process, it wasn't instant, was it? It took time.
No, definitely not like flipping a switch back on. It's a careful, gradual process. By late on Monday, reports suggested Portugal had power back to over 87% of customers.
Okay, pretty good progress there.
Spain was a bit behind, maybe around 61% restored by then. Later updates showed Spain getting to about 50% by Monday evening, but then up to nearly 90% by Tuesday morning.
So steady progress overnight.
Yeah. And Portugal also reported getting power back to about 750,000 customers by Monday evening. So step by step, bringing sections of the grid back online carefully.
And while the engineers were doing their thing, what about keeping things calm, preventing trouble?
Authorities were definitely focused on that. Lots of public messages urging calm, reassuring people. But at the same time, they increased security presence on the streets.
As a precaution.
Yeah, basically to deter any potential looting or disorder while things were still disrupted. Standard procedure in a major crisis like this.
Looking beyond the immediate fix, this event feels pretty major in the grand scheme of things. It's been called one of the worst European blackouts in years. What are the bigger takeaways here?
Well, it's a stark reminder, isn't it? Our power grids are incredibly complex and interconnected. That brings benefits like sharing power, but it also means
A problem in one spot can spread fast.
exactly, it highlights that vulnerability. And it also brings up questions about integrating renewable energy like solar and wind. Renewables are vital, obviously, but their output fluctuates, depending on sun and wind. Managing that variability smoothly across a huge grid adds another layer of complexity. You need really sophisticated monitoring and controls.
So after something like this, what kind of preventative measures get talked about? How do we stop it happening again?
A few key areas come up. Making those interconnectors between countries more resilient, maybe with better automatic control so one grid failing doesn't automatically drag others down.
Great.
Also investing in much smarter, faster grid monitoring systems, things that can detect problems like those oscillations instantly and isolate the fault before it spreads.
Makes sense. What else?
Better ways to manage the inflows from renewables, stronger coordination between the grid operators across different countries, upgrading infrastructure to handle weird weather or environmental events.
Like that rare atmospheric phenomenon idea.
Potentially, yeah. And just doing more regular, really tough stress tests on the whole system to find weak points before they cause a massive failure.
It's interesting you mentioned renewables management. Wasn't there a warning sign about solar power just weeks before this happened?
Yes, that's a really notable point. Apparently, the grid operator in Belgium had actually put out a warning in early April
About what?
about potential grid instability because of too much solar power being generated at certain times,
Yeah.
overloading the system, essentially.
Wow. So while we don't know the exact cause here yet, it definitely flags that balancing act with renewables as a critical issue.
It certainly seems relevant, yeah. The investigation will hopefully clarify the specific sequence of events, but it underlines that challenge.
And getting back to normal wasn't instant either. I heard it might take a while for the Portuguese network.
Right, it's right. RNN, the Portuguese operator, indicated it could take maybe up to a week for their network to be fully stabilized and back to normal operations after such a major shock.
A whole week. That really shows how complex these systems are to restart properly.
It does. It's not just about getting the lights back on. It's about ensuring the whole system is stable and resilient again.
Okay, so let's try and wrap up this deep dive. We've looked at this huge, sudden blackout across Spain and Portugal, millions affected, massive disruption to, well, everything. Transport, hospitals, daily life.
Yeah, and while the exact trigger is still being investigated, it looks like a complex technical failure, maybe involving those grid oscillations, issues with interconnection, possibly complicated by factors like renewable energy flows.
But importantly, cyberattacks were ruled out early on. The focus is really on the physics and engineering of the grid itself.
Right, and the immediate fallout just hammered home how incredibly dependent we all are, you, me, everyone, on having stable electricity. Pretty much 204/7.
It really is the bedrock of modern society, isn't it?
Mm.
This event is just such a powerful reminder of how interconnected everything is and how one failure, or maybe a rapid series of failures, can just cascade outwards.
Couldn't agree more. And while we wait for the final investigation results, the response from the authorities, the work of the grid operators to restore power and understand the cause, that's all obviously crucial.
So maybe a final thought for you listening. Thinking about how complex and interconnected these vital systems like the power grid are becoming, what other kinds of unexpected events, maybe things we haven't even thought much about, could have similarly widespread impacts? And, how can we as individuals and as societies get better prepared for these kinds of big disruptions? Definitely something worth considering.